The emergency lights on Nexus Station pulsed red, then settled into a somber blue that made everyone uncomfortable. Ambassador Aura stood at the center of the council chamber, her crystalline body barely glowing. She had never looked so dim before. Around her, representatives from 40 different species waited in silence. Nobody wanted to speak first. 3 weeks ago, the cascade had happened. Scientists were still trying to explain it, but the results were clear enough. 17 star systems had simply stopped existing. One moment they were there, the next moment they were gone. No explosions, no warnings, just silence where billions of lives used to be. 4.3 billion dead. The number was too big to understand. Whole planets gone, ancient civilizations erased. Species that had existed for millions of years, reduced to scattered survivors on distant colonies. The had been hit worst of all. Their great composer halls, their neural-linked orchestras, all gone. "We must honor them," Ara finally said. Her voice came through the translators as a low hum. "The tradition is clear. When tragedy strikes the galaxy, we commission a mourning work, something to help us all grieve together." Of the shifted his massive bulk, his subsonic voice made the floor vibrate. "They always created these works. For 10,000 years they gave us the music to mourn by. But now—" He didn't finish. Everyone knew. The composers who remained were scattered, traumatized, broken. Their gift had always been their ability to create psychoharmonic frequencies that transmitted emotion directly from mind to mind. But you couldn't transmit emotions when your own mind was shattered by grief. "We have tried," one of the surviving said through the quantum link. Her image flickered on the screens, showing a being that looked like living light dimmed to almost nothing. "3 of us attempted to compose something last week. We couldn't. Every time we try to shape the harmonics, we just feel it all again. The moment of loss, the silence. We cannot create from this." The council chamber fell quiet again. This had never happened before. Every other tragedy in galactic history had been mourned properly, with grand psychoharmonic works that let everyone experience the grief together, process it together, move forward together. Without they had nothing. Ambassador Way of Earth stood up. She was small compared to most of the other representatives. Humans had only been part of galactic society for 200 years, barely any time at all. Most species still thought of them as newcomers, interesting but not particularly important. "I might have a suggestion," said carefully. The translators carried her words out to everyone. Made a sound like rocks grinding together, which was how they laughed. "With respect, Ambassador, human music is not suitable for this. Your people still use acoustic instruments, sound waves through air. It's very primitive." "I know," said. She didn't sound offended. "We can't create psychoharmonic frequencies. Our brains don't work that way. But humans have been making music for death for a very long time, since before we knew what stars were. I'd like to show you something." She activated her personal device. A moment later, sound filled the chamber. It was strange music, made by human instruments that most of the species present had never heard before. Strings being pulled, air pushed through tubes, vibrations in stretched membranes. Simple sound waves, nothing more. But something about it made them all stop moving. The music was heavy, slow, full of something they couldn't quite name. It didn't transmit emotions like compositions did. It didn't have to. The way it was built, the way the sounds moved and changed and resolved and didn't resolve, created feelings by itself. When it ended, Aura's crystalline form had brightened slightly. "What was that?" "It's called a requiem," said. "Composed by a human named about 700 years ago. It was music for death, for mourning. He wrote it while he was dying." "Play another," someone said. Played 3 more pieces. Each one was different, but they all carried the same weight. The same understanding that something precious had been lost and could never come back. The council members listened with whatever senses their species used for sound. Some of them had never paid attention to human music before. It had always seemed too simple, too limited. "This is just organized air pressure," said, but he sounded less certain now. "How does it carry so much meaning without direct neural transmission?" "I don't really know," admitted. "But humans learned to put grief into sound a long time ago. We learned to make something that other people could hear and understand, even if they never knew the person we lost, even if they lived centuries later. Maybe it's because we can't transmit feelings directly. We had to find other ways to share them." Ara moved to the center of the chamber. "You believe humans could create the mourning work for the cascade?" "I think we could try," said. "It wouldn't be like what the make. It would be simpler in some ways, but it might work, if you're willing to trust us." The debate lasted for 6 hours. Many argued against it. Humans were too young, their music too primitive, their understanding of galactic culture too shallow. How could they possibly create something that would speak to hundreds of different species? How could acoustic instruments mourn for beings who didn't even hear through ears? But others pointed out that they had no other options. They couldn't help. No other species had the musical traditions to attempt it, and something about those human recordings had reached them in ways they didn't expect. Finally, they voted. It was close, but it passed. Humanity would be commissioned to create the universal mourning music for the cascade. The first time in galactic history that such an important task had been given to such a young species. "You'll have 6 months, Ara said to. "Choose your best composers. We'll provide you with whatever resources you need. Access to our historical archives, meetings with survivors, information about each species that was lost. Bowed slightly, we'll do our best to honor them." After the session ended, stood alone in the observation deck, looking out at the dark void where the systems used to shine. She felt the weight of what she just agreed to. 4.3 billion dead, 12 different species, cultures that had existed longer than Earth had been inhabited, and she just promised that human composers could create music worthy of their memory. She thought about all the times humans had faced loss, all the wars, all the plagues, all the personal griefs that had inspired requiems and elegies and funeral songs throughout human history. Humans knew death intimately. They'd been processing it through music since they first learned to make tools. But this was different. This wasn't mourning for humans. This was mourning for beings they barely understood, using instruments that couldn't transmit psychoharmonic frequencies, trying to speak to a galaxy that mostly saw them as primitive newcomers. Pulled up her communication device and began drafting messages to Earth. She needed to find composers, not just good ones but the best humanity had. People who understood that music could carry meanings beyond notes and rhythms. People who could take the impossible weight of galactic grief and somehow turn it into something that could be shared. As she wrote, she kept looking at that dark void. 17 star systems, all those lives, all those voices that would never speak again. The galaxy needed to mourn them properly, and somehow, impossibly, humans were going to help them do it. She thought about something her grandmother had told her once, back on Earth. Music is the language we use when words aren't enough. Her grandmother had been talking about a funeral, about how singing together helped everyone feel less alone in their grief. Maybe that was what the galaxy needed now. Not perfect psychoharmonic transmission of exactly what to feel, but something simpler. Something that reminded them they weren't alone. Something that said grief was okay, that remembering was important, that the silence left behind by the lost still meant something. Finished her messages and sent them. Within hours, Earth's greatest composers would know they'd been called to do something no human had ever been asked to do before. She just hoped they were ready for it. Maestro stood in the arrivals bay of Nexus Station, watching her fellow composers come through the airlock. She'd been the first to arrive 3 days ago. Now the others were joining her, one by one. Wu from the Beijing Conservatory, from the African Union Symphony, who specialized in fusion works. 4 others, each one brilliant in their own way. They'd all received the same message. They'd all agreed to come, though some had hesitated. The task was enormous, maybe impossible. Create a single piece of music that would serve as the official memorial for the greatest tragedy in galactic history. 6 months to do what normally took years. And they had to do it for species they'd never met, using instruments that most of the galaxy thought were primitive toys. "Did you see it yet?" asked as soon as he reached. He meant the void, the dark space where the systems used to be. "Yes," said quietly. "This morning it's bigger than I thought." "How do we write music for that?" asked. He was the youngest of them, barely 40. His specialty was memorial works. He'd composed 17 pieces for various human tragedies, but those had all been for humans, for people he understood. "How do we even start?" Was already pulling up files on her tablet. "They've given us access to everything. Historical records, cultural archives, musical traditions from all 12 species that were lost. There's centuries of material here. Maybe." "That's the problem," said. "We can't possibly learn it all in 6 months. We can't become experts in composition or rhythm structures or any of the rest. We'll always be outsiders trying to understand something we didn't live through." They stood together in silence, 8 humans carrying a weight that felt like it might crush them. Around them, aliens of various species moved through the station on their business, most of them barely glancing at the humans. Some of them had lost family in the cascade. All of them were waiting to see if these primitive newcomers could actually deliver something worthy. The council had assigned them liaisons, people who could help them understand what they needed to know. Survivors from each affected species who'd agreed to meet with the composers and share their stories. The first meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. It was harder than had imagined. They gathered in a conference room with environmental controls, each liaison in their own zone with appropriate atmosphere and gravity. A mother spoke about losing her brood cluster. The translators did their best, but could tell something was being lost. The word for what she'd lost didn't translate directly to any human language. It was something between family and a shared consciousness, a connection that humans had never experienced. A philosopher talked about knowledge that was gone forever. His species kept their history in biological memory chains, passed down through direct neural transfer from teacher to student. When the cascade happened, hundreds of those chains had simply ended. Thousands of years of philosophy, science, and art lost because there was nobody left to remember it. Each story was like that. Each one revealed something that the humans hadn't understood before. Grief wasn't universal. Each species experienced loss differently, valued different things, mourned in different ways. The changed colors when they grieved, their skin shifting through spectrums that meant things humans couldn't perceive. The produced subsonic vibrations that resonated in their thoraxes, a physical expression of sadness that humans would never feel. After 3 days of meetings, had his first breakdown, found him in his quarters, staring at blank composition sheets. "I can't do this," he said. "Every time I try to write something, I realize how much I don't understand. How can I write music for the when I can't even fully grasp what they lost? How can I honor them and when their entire concept of knowledge is alien to me?" Sat down beside him. She felt the same way. They all did, but giving up wasn't an option. "Maybe we're thinking about this wrong," she said slowly. "Maybe we're not supposed to fully understand." "What do you mean?" "The created psychoharmonic works that transmitted emotions directly. Everyone felt exactly what they wanted them to feel, but we can't do that. We're human. All we have is sound waves and instruments. Maybe that's actually the point." Looked at her. "I'm not following." Pulled up one of the recordings Way had played for the council. Requiem. "This doesn't transmit grief. It doesn't make you feel exactly what felt. It creates space for your own grief. You hear it and you fill it with your own losses, your own memories. Maybe that's what we need to do. Not try to tell everyone what to feel, but give them space to feel it themselves." The idea started to grow. Over the next week, the composers met in long sessions, throwing ideas back and forth. What if they created something that was deliberately incomplete, something that required each listener to participate, to bring their own understanding of loss? They brought the concept to the three surviving composers. The meeting happened through Quantum Link, the still too fragile to appear in person. Explained the idea carefully, worried they'd be offended, worried they'd think humans were making excuses for their own limitations. But one of them responded with something unexpected. "For 10,000 years," she said through the translator, "we have been the galaxy's voice for mourning. We transmitted grief perfectly, completely. But I wonder now if we made a mistake. We made it too easy, too perfect. We left no room for individual experience." Another added, "Your music is incomplete by nature. It requires interpretation. That might be exactly what the galaxy needs right now. Space to mourn in their own ways, not in the way we tell them to." The permission helped. The composers threw themselves into the work with new energy. They started mapping out a structure. 3 movements they decided, before, during, and after. Life, death, and what remains. But they still needed to understand the musical traditions of the lost species. Took charge of that, diving into the archives. She found recordings, notation systems, theoretical frameworks. The problem was that most of it was designed for psychoharmonic transmission. They didn't write music the way humans did. Their notation wasn't about sound waves, it was about neural pathways. "We can't replicate this," said after a week of study. "Their music exists in a completely different medium than ours." "Then we adapt it," said. "We take the ideas, the structures, the emotional content, and we translate it into something our instruments can play. It won't be perfect. It can't be, but it can be respectful." They worked 18-hour days, focused on the traditions, finding ways to translate their complex polyrhythmic patterns into human percussion. Studied harmonics, discovering that their color-based music had mathematical relationships that could be expressed in tonal frequencies. Herself took on the fragments, trying to capture something of their style even without the psychoharmonic element. Each composer became an expert in 1 or 2 alien musical traditions. Not a true expert, they'd need lifetimes for that, but knowledgeable enough to honor the source material. Knowledgeable enough to make something that said, "We tried to understand you." The first movement started to take shape. They called it before in their private notes, though the official title would be something else. It began simply with a single melody that sounded almost human. Then layer after layer built on top of it. Each new layer brought in elements from a different species' musical tradition. Percussion, harmonics, inspired string passages. The music grew complex, dense, alive with different voices all speaking at once. It was a sonic representation of what had been lost. All those different cultures, all existing together, making something beautiful through their diversity. The composers listened to it and felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could actually do this. But then came the hard part, the second movement, the cascade itself. They debated for weeks about how to represent it. Should it be loud, chaotic? Should it build to a terrible climax that represented the moment of destruction? Every idea they tried felt wrong. Too dramatic, too simple, too human. It was who finally suggested the answer that changed everything. "What if it's silent?" he said. "What if the second movement is just silence? No music at all?" The others stared at him. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of nothing, asked. "That's how long the cascade lasted. You want 7 minutes of silence in the middle of our symphony?" "Not nothing," said. "Performed silence. We stay on stage. We hold our instruments. The conductor still conducts. We mark the time, but we don't play. We show the space where all that music should be, where all those lives should be. And we let everyone fill that space with their own understanding of what's missing." Felt something click into place. It was perfect. It was terrifying. 7 minutes of silence in a galactic memorial concert would be unprecedented, maybe controversial. But it was exactly right. The void itself. The absence. not trying to represent the tragedy with sound but giving it the respect of silence. They built the rest of the symphony around that central void. The third movement was called After, and it was the hardest to write. How did you follow silence? How did you represent what came next? They decided to make it sparse, simpler than the first movement. The music would return, but it would have holes in it now, places where the lost voices should have been. The harmonies would be incomplete, some questions left unanswered, and it would be quieter, more hesitant, like the universe itself was unsure how to continue. But it would continue. That was the message. Grief doesn't end. The holes never fill, but life goes on around them, carrying that absence forward. As the deadline approached, something unexpected started happening. The composers began receiving messages from survivors, recordings sent from across the galaxy, lullabies from lost worlds, work songs, wedding music, festival pieces, the sounds of everyday life that would never be heard again except in these archived recordings. At first, didn't know what to do with them. They couldn't use them directly. Copyright issues aside, it would be disrespectful to treat them as raw material, but had an idea. We don't sample them, she said. We honor them. We listen to each one and we let it inspire us. We write original music that echoes them, that carries their spirit. So they listened. Hours and hours of alien music, some of it beautiful, some of it incomprehensible to human ears, and they wove the essence of it into their work. A lullaby inspired a string passage in the third movement. A work song gave structure to a percussion section. Each piece of the symphony became a memorial to specific moments of life that were gone. The work grew from a human composition into something larger, something that humans had organized and written, but that drew from the entire galaxy. A collective work built from fragments and memories and grief. 3 days before the premiere, they performed it for the surviving composers. The three fragile beings listened through quantum link, their forms barely visible on the screens. When the performance ended, silence filled the rehearsal space. The humans waited, terrified. Finally, one spoke. "It is not what we would have made." Felt her heart sink. They'd failed after all. But the continued. "It is better. It is what needed to be made. You have built a temple where grief can gather. You have given us space to mourn as ourselves, not as the galaxy tells us to mourn. This is a great gift." The premiere was scheduled for the new memorial station at the edge of the void. Representatives from every species in the galaxy would attend, and 8 human composers would stand before them with nothing but acoustic instruments and organized sound waves. Hopping it would be enough. The memorial station hung in the darkness like a defiant star. From its windows, the void was visible, the black space where 17 star systems used to shine. It was terrifying to look at. Not empty space like the rest of the universe, but a wrongness, a place where something had been violently removed. Inside the main chamber, beings from 847 species gathered. The room was a miracle of engineering. Force shields created zones with different atmospheres, gravities, and environmental conditions. Some species needed methane to breathe. Others required intense radiation. Some existed partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. All of them had come to mourn. Stood backstage trying to control her shaking hands. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the massive chamber filling with delegates. She'd known it would be big, but seeing it was different. So many beings, so many different forms of life, all of them waiting to hear what humans had created. 10 minutes, a station official said through the translator. The official was, their skin currently a muted blue-gray that had learned meant solemn attention. Her fellow composers gathered around her. They were all wearing formal concert attire, black clothes that were traditional for human mourning music. The orchestra, 60 human musicians plus 23 alien volunteers who'd learned to play alongside them, waited in the wings. "We've done everything we can," said quietly. He looked pale but determined. "The music is ready, we just have to trust it now." Ambassador Wei appeared, looking nervous but proud. "They're about to start the introduction," she said. "The council wants you to know, whatever happens, you've already accomplished something remarkable. You brought the galaxy together." Nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd barely slept in weeks. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that void, felt the weight of those lost lives, wondered if human music could possibly be enough to honor them. The lights in the chamber dimmed. Walked out to the podium to give the introduction. Her voice was translated into 847 languages simultaneously, reaching beings through ears, antennae, neural receptors, and sense organs that humans didn't have names for. "We gather here at the edge of absence," began. "3 months ago, the cascade took from us 17 star systems and 4.3 billion lives. We lost friends, family, entire civilizations. We lost knowledge, art, history, and possibilities. The silence left behind is so vast that we struggle to understand it." She paused. In the audience, beings shifted in whatever way their species showed attention. "For we have marked our greatest tragedies with works of mourning. They have always given us these gifts, music that transmitted grief directly, perfectly, so we could all feel it together. But the cascade took most of them from us as well. In our darkest hour, we lost the voice that usually speaks our grief." Look toward the stage. Humanity has tried to fill that silence. What you are about to hear is different from traditional galactic mourning music. It does not transmit emotions through psychoharmonic frequencies. It cannot make you feel what the composers felt. Instead, it invites you to bring your own grief. It creates space for you to mourn in your own way, as your own species, with your own memories of what was lost. She stepped back. "Please welcome Maestro and the Memorial Symphony Orchestra." Walked onto the stage, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The orchestra filed in behind her, taking their seats. She reached the conductor's podium and turned to face the audience. 847 species looked back at her, or listened, or sensed her presence in whatever way their species worked. She felt impossibly small, impossibly inadequate. A human with a wooden stick, about to conduct music made by vibrating strings and air pressure, trying to speak to beings who could manipulate quantum fields and exist in multiple dimensions. But she raised her baton anyway. The orchestra lifted their instruments. The chamber fell silent. The first movement began. A single note from the first violin, pure and clear. Then the cello joined, creating harmony. The viola added a third voice. Layer by layer the music built. Each new addition brought a different element, a rhythm pattern from the percussion, a harmonic sequence from the winds, an inspired passage from the strings. The music grew complex, dense, alive. It represented life itself, all the different voices of civilization existing together, speaking their own languages but creating something beautiful through their diversity. Melodies wove in and out, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes clashing, but always moving forward together. In the audience, beings who had never heard their music traditions played by human instruments felt something unexpected. It wasn't perfect. The subsonic elements couldn't be fully replicated by human percussion. The inspired passages lacked the psychoharmonic resonance they should have had. But the attempt itself meant something. The music was saying, "We heard you, we tried to understand, we will not let these sounds be forgotten." The first movement built toward what seemed like a climax. The music grew louder, faster, more complex. It felt like it was about to explode into something overwhelming, but instead, it simply stopped. Silence. The second movement had begun, kept her baton moving through the empty air, marking time that contained no sound. The orchestra remained poised, instruments ready, obviously prepared to play but choosing not to. It was performed silence, structured absence, the space where 4.3 billion voices should have been. 7 minutes, 43 seconds, the exact duration of the cascade. At first, the audience didn't understand what was happening. Was this a technical failure? Had something gone wrong? But as the silence stretched on, as they watched the conductor's baton continue to move and the musicians continue to mark time, they realized. This was intentional. This was the music. Without psychoharmonic frequencies to guide them, without emotional transmission, the beings in the chamber found themselves alone with their grief in a way most of them had never experienced. The silence became a mirror. Each species filled it with their own understanding of loss. A mother felt her brood scars burning. The empty space where her brood cluster should have been resonated with the empty space in the music. A philosopher watched 17 star systems worth of knowledge disappear again in his mind's eye. A delegate shifted through colors that no human could see, expressing grief in the language of her skin. And then they began to notice something else. They weren't alone. Through the environmental barriers, they could see others grieving. Different bodies, different expressions, different ways of processing loss, but the same fundamental experience. The silence connected them not by telling them what to feel, but by giving them space to feel together. His eyes streamed with tears, but her baton never wavered. 7 minutes, 43 seconds. Every moment felt like an eternity. Every moment honored a fraction of those lost. When the third movement finally began, it started so softly that some beings weren't sure it had started. A single human voice, a soprano singing a wordless melody based on a recovered lullaby. Then one violin joined. Then another instrument. Slowly, carefully, the music returned. But it was different now, simpler than the first movement, sparser. There were holes in the harmonies, spaces that would never be filled, questions left unanswered. The complexity of before was gone. What remained was music that knew it was incomplete. But it continued. That was the message. The music acknowledged the silence, carried it forward, built around and through it. This is what remains. This is what we do with loss. We don't resolve it. We don't overcome it. We learn to make music that has space for it. As the movement progressed, something remarkable happened. The environmental force shields began to drop in a carefully controlled sequence. The different atmospheres mixed, creating harmonic interference patterns, sounds that could only happen when these specific gases and pressures interacted. The result was unrepeatable, unique to this exact moment with these exact beings carrying this specific grief. The mixed atmospheres created sounds that no human composer had planned. Strange harmonics, unexpected resonances, a chorus of interference that was barely musical but somehow perfect. It was chaos and order together. Individual species contributing to something larger without losing their distinctiveness. The symphony moved toward its conclusion. The music didn't resolve into a major key. It didn't offer comfort or closure. It ended with a question, a hanging chord that each listener would complete in their own way. The final note faded, lowered her baton. The orchestra released their held breath. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, approval began to ripple through the crowd. Bioluminescent flashes from species that communicated through light. Harmonic resonances from beings that expressed emotion through controlled sound. The percussion applause that sounded like distant thunder. Humans clapping and crying simultaneously. The three surviving composers emerged from their isolation chamber. They'd been monitoring the emotional resonances throughout, using their remaining abilities to sense what humans couldn't. Their spokesperson's image appeared on the screens, her light form brighter than had ever seen it. For 10,000 years, they said, my people gave this galaxy its voice for grief. We transmitted feeling directly, perfectly, so all could experience loss the same way. But we see now that we may have done something wrong. We made mourning too efficient, too complete. We left no space for individual experience, for personal loss, for species-specific ways of processing grief. She turned toward the stage. You have given us something we lost the capacity to create, music that requires participation, that demands each being bring their own sorrow to complete it. This is not inferior to our methods. It is different, and perhaps it is what we needed all along. The chamber erupted with approval again. stood at the podium, tears running down her face, unable to believe what was happening. They'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd created something that worked. In the weeks that followed, the universal mourning music was performed across the galaxy. 6,000 performances in venues ranging from grand halls to small colony domes. But no two were the same. Each culture adapted it, finding new ways to honor the silence at its heart. Some added their own traditional instruments. Others performed it in different environmental conditions that created unique harmonics. The music became a template, a framework that could hold countless expressions of grief. Received messages from across the galaxy, survivors thanking her not for telling them how to grieve, but for giving them permission to grieve in their own way. The mother wrote, "For the first time since the cascade, I was allowed to miss my brood not as someone else expected me to mourn. The silence gave me that." A year later, the Galactic Council awarded humanity the Eternal Harmonic Medal, the highest artistic honor in galactic civilization. Wei accepted it at a ceremony that watched from Earth. The medal was beautiful, made of crystallized biolite, but what meant more were words. "We did not create this symphony," said. 4.3 billion beings created it by living, and then by dying, and then by being remembered. We simply wrote down the echo of their silence, and we reminded the galaxy that grief, like music, is something we can only truly understand when we experience it together. Kept the medal in a simple case in her studio. Beside it, she kept a handwritten note written during those difficult early days when they'd all wondered if they could succeed. "We tried to write music for aliens," the note said, "and ended up writing music for grief itself. Turns out, that's something everyone understands." The Galactic Tragedy Symphony would be performed for centuries to come. Whenever loss was too great for words, when silence needed to be honored, the galaxy would turn to this work created by the young species who'd learned to transform grief into organized sound waves. And always, at its heart, would be that 7-minute, 43-second silence, a void that every being in the galaxy would fill with their own understanding of what it meant to lose someone who could never be replaced. Humanity had proven something the elder species had forgotten. The most universal language isn't the one that tells you what to feel. It's the one that invites you to feel in your own way and promises you won't be alone while you do it.